Hello, psychology students. This is Mrs. Politsky, and I have notes for Module 11, Emotion. So, we're going to kind of talk a little bit about where emotions come from and some of the things that happen to us physiologically. So, the whole organism response involving physiological arousal, expressive behavior, and conscious experience are called emotions. And there are three ingredients to emotions. First, there is a physiological activation, meaning that we have either our heart rate going up or heart rate kind of going down. There is also an expressive behavior, meaning that we might be smiling or we might be really excited and pumping our fist in the air, or maybe we're expressing sadness. And finally, conscious experiences. This is the interpretation of what it means to be a member, to either understand what is meant to be not included. So, in a sense, all three of these together kind of make up our expression of emotion. And for the most part, some people, are a little more emotional than others. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the historical approaches or theories on emotion. And the first one is actually from a couple guys. One, William James, who we've talked about. He was the first American psychologist, wrote the first textbook on psychology. And his partner, in this case, Carl Lang. Now, I will say this. These two men didn't necessarily work in the same lab because Lang was in Denmark and James was in America. But their ideas about emotion were actually happening roughly about the same period of time. And so we've taken these two guys and we have coined a theory based on our awareness of physiological responses to emotion. And it is called the James Lang theory, of all things. It basically says that we experience emotion because we're aware of our bodily responses to an emotion arousing stimulus. So, for example, I see a car speeding towards me, my heart's pumping, and then I'm like, oh, I'm afraid. So, in a sense, we have to have the fast beating heart to know that we are maybe in a state of fear. Okay. Shortly around that period of time, there was another theory on emotion, coined mostly by a guy named Walter Cannon and his partner, a guy named Bard, and it is now known as the Cannon-Bard theory. But it concluded that physiological arousal and emotion are kind of happening simultaneously. They're happening at the same time. So in a sense, I can see this car barreling towards me, and my heart's going up, but I'm feeling fear at the same moment. There's no basically thinking about it, it is happening at the same time. Okay. Cognition and emotion, meaning when we think about cognition, we're thinking about thinking. Which comes first? Our thoughts about a situation, hence sometimes known as our cognitive appraisal, or the experience of the emotion? And that was a question for another researcher, a man named Stanley Schechter. And he was an American psychologist along with his partner, Jerome Singer. And they concluded that emotion requires a cognitive label of the physical arousal. Hence, it is sometimes known as the two-factor theory, or I've also heard it called the Schechter-Singer theory. But for our class, we're going to call it the two-factor theory. That explains that to experience emotion, we must be physically aroused and label that arousal. So first, when we talk about the factor, we have the physiological arousal that can be brought about by maybe a loud stimulus or a drug, or, in the case of our example below, the car barreling towards you, and you might have your heart pumping, but at the same time, you're thinking about it. This is where the cognitive appraisal comes from, or cognitive arousal. We're trying to think about, what am I feeling here? My heart's pumping. Why am I afraid? And after you've thought about it, then you can actually label it as fear. Okay. It's possible that your heart could be pumping and you think about it and you think, maybe this isn't something I should be afraid of. So, in a sense, when we talk about the two factor theory, it gives us a little bit of time to think about our response. Okay, should we be afraid? Should we become angry? Should we be excited or happy? All of that is because we've had that time to assess. All right, so let's talk about fear. Preparing for an alarming situation. So, first thing I want to mention is that fear is one of those emotions that has to be learned. As children, we are fearless. And it's usually because of things that are happening in our environment that cause us to understand that something should make us maybe be a little more alert or be threatened. But it's something that we've learned along the way. So when we are facing something that might be an alarming or fearful situation, typically the blood flow from our organs is momentarily, um, basically for the non-essential functions, um, basically goes towards our body parts that we might need for this emergency situation. So it might mean, to my legs so I can run faster, or to my heart so it can pump faster. Our digestion slows down. It's almost like when we talk about, or when we have talked about the nervous system, and we're talking about maybe the parasympathetic or the sympathetic in this case, where we're getting pumped up for this adrenaline provoking situation here. So we're not going to want to eat. We might feel even nauseous. That blood flow is going to go to the muscles that we need so we can get away. So if I see a snake, like we see in the diagram here, it might tell I might tell myself that I need to move. And so that energy is going to go towards the muscles to carry me away from that situation. Along with that, when we're talking about the physiological stuff, our pupils tend to dilate, meaning that they increase in size to allow more light into our eyes to improve our vision. Our liver is dumping a lot of sugar into our bloodstream for energy. Perspiration is happening so that it can cool down our body. Eventually, the autonomic nervous system, particularly the sympathetic division, is kicking in here, and it's going to get us all aroused. After things cool down, then the parasympathetic division will come in and it will bring us back to homeostasis. So, expressions of emotion, nonverbal communication. When we talk about nonverbal communication or body language, this is a kind of a messenger or frequent messenger of our emotions to others. So, our facial expression, the tone of our voice, our hand gestures kind of give us away as far as what we're really thinking. And people tend to look at a person's mouth to detect things like happiness, but we also look for their eyes to understand things like fear and anger. We see a picture of a lie detector test or a polygraph. One of the things that should be mentioned is that, polygraphs are using things like blood pressure, heart rate, things of that nature, to determine whether a person is innocent or guilty. And if you take a look at the bar graph here, sometimes it's not always the most accurate. And what we're finding is that a lot of states don't allow for polygraphs to be used as evidence within a court case. Part of that is the fact that there are some people that know how to physiologically control their emotions so that they can get kind of off the hook. So if you're a person who's guilty, but yet you can control your blood pressure by relaxing and improving your blood rate, that can also improve your heart rate as well. You might be able to trick the polygraph exam. So, moving on. Gender and cultural expressions or effects on emotion. Studies suggest that women show better skills at detecting emotion in people's facial expressions, body movements, and tone of voice. But both males and females find it more difficult to read the body language of the opposite sex than to read the body language of people of their own gender. So, a guy might have a hard time reading maybe his wife or his girlfriend or his daughter, whether or not she's upset or sad. But another woman might be able to easily or feel or understand the expression that is being made, whether or not it's one of anger or sadness or such. In North America, women tend to smile more. They gesture more expressively. They have more expressive faces than their male counterparts. Women also tend to talk more about their emotions than men do. In North America, men, on the other hand, do seem to express one emotion, particularly anger, more openly than men. What I want you to take a look at is at the very bottom. There are a couple of pairs of images here. There's a picture of a man and a picture or a drawing or of a fellow there. One of the things that I want you to look for is the authentic smile. Okay, one is a fake smile, one is a real smile. And the truth is, when we are actually really smiling at someone, we tend to smile more with our eyes. And if you're looking at the kind of the bottom left image, that pair of images, the man who is on the far left side, his mouth is smiling, but his eyes are not crinkly. And if you look at the image just to his right, he's smiling, but his eyes are a little more crinkled or wrinkled. That is probably more of an authentic smile. So being able to look for those kind of cues is very important. And matter of fact, when we talk about law enforcement, they have a tendency to also look at our body language during times of questioning to determine whether or not a person is telling the truth or telling a lie. All right, two factors that affect the way that we learn to express and interpret our emotions. One is power. First factor in interpreting our nonverbal communications is power. The person with less power is probably more motivated to read those nonverbal cues. Because if they're going to get an advantage over somebody who holds power over them, they have to be able to see what's going on. The second is the culture. Interpreting nonverbal communication has a lot to do with how you were raised. And people raised in expressive families or cultures that have a tendency to be a little more emotionally expressive are more likely to be more expressive regardless whether they're male or female. There are also cultural rules that govern how and when a person may express emotion. And we'll probably talk a little bit more about this when we get into sociology, but there is a term that we use in psychology and in sociology called display rules. And there are certain cultures where men will openly cry and weep, and others where they won't. They'll be a little more reserved. So, needless to say, those display rules really do dictate a little bit about how we do express our emotion. Thank you very much.